This month marks 100 years, a full century since Tennessee hosted the first ever trial of the century. Now, I know we toss that term around a lot, but in this case, it fits. 157 miles from Nashville, in Dayton, Tennessee, a young teacher was accused of defying a brand new state law by opening a book to a chapter on evolution and sharing it with his class. Writer Leon Alligood has always been fascinated with the Scopes trial, and 100 years on, the issues and arguments remain amazingly fresh.
What should children be taught in school? Can science be trusted? Does government have the right to dictate cultural values? What does the Constitution mean by freedom of religion, by freedom of speech? Who defines the future in a democratic society? If you think these are battle lines drawn by 2025 society, you would be correct. But the colliding fault lines that are fracturing today's electorate were rumbling in 1925, and the shaking hasn't abated.
I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner & Company. I've been told that you have always been sort of captivated by this story. True?
It's very true, very true. I remember hearing about the Scopes trial when I was a young man growing up in South Georgia. And in high school, we were doing Inherit the Wind in class one day, and I was cast as the Clarence Darrow character to read his lines. I'm the son of a Southern Baptist minister, so Genesis has been part and parcel of my life forever. But to hear Clarence Darrow talk to William Jennings Bryan about these issues, these big questions about how man came to be, how the earth came to be, and it just opened my eyes. And it's not that I was being told what to believe, but having these big questions asked by these characters, larger-than-life characters, it just started making me think. And I began looking at what was the Scopes trial? What was it all about? When I moved to Tennessee, I went to Dayton a couple of times to go to the museum and just was enthralled with the story. To be there in that space, that's a key thing. So many of our courthouses in Tennessee were destroyed by fire over the years, or people just decided, let's build a new one and let's knock down the one that's got some historic looks to it and build a giant box of concrete. But Dayton didn't do that. Ray County didn't do that. They kept their courthouse, and it's a fantastic place. And the fact that you can go 100 years later to the Ray County Courthouse and stand in the very spot where William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow stood, that's just fantastic to me. It takes my breath every time I go into that grand space. When I was a professor at MTSU, I took students to Dayton, and we were focusing on telling the story of the Scopes trial and what it meant. I think at that time, that was 10 years ago, it was on the 90th anniversary of the Scopes trial. And I just made my students one day, we just spent the afternoon in that courthouse, in that courtroom. And I just wanted them to understand this important thing happened here, and you can stand in the place where it happened. It's something that we can go to Civil War battlefields, and we know that what happened here, but we don't know exactly where it happened. So it's nice to be able to go to such a confined space and say, Clarence Darrow, he walked on these floors. William Jennings Bryan walked on these floors.
Right.
It's always interested me.
Just to set the stage a little, take us back 100 years and 157 miles from Nashville to Dayton. What was going on there in 1925?
In 1925, Dayton was having hard times. Its primary employer, the Cumberland Iron Furnace Works, and I'm getting that name mixed up, I think. But anyway, it was going. It was not doing well. It didn't have the updated equipment, and the mines, what they were mining was being depleted, and they were looking for new places to mine, but weren't having any luck. They brought in a guy by the name of George Rapelier, who was a New Yorker. He had married a woman from Dayton, and he came to Dayton, and even though he didn't sound like Daytonians, or looked like them, he was accepted by them, and he loved Dayton, and he wanted to see it prosper. And so when he read in the Chattanooga Times that the ACLU was looking for someone, for a biology teacher who had taught evolution, to come forward and admit that they taught evolution and put a court test case out. And George Rapelier said, boys, and who he was talking to were the Dayton Progressive Club, which was the movers and shakers of Dayton, and they met in the local drugstore there, which had a soda fountain as well. And George Rapelier comes in with a Chattanooga paper and says, this might be our ticket to putting our name out there, put Dayton on the map. And if we have a court case here, then people are going to come, and maybe the publicity resulting from that will help us in the future. So that's what was happening in 1925.
And something called the Butler Act had just passed the legislature. What did it say, and had it been controversial, or did it kind of sail through?
It was. It pretty much sailed through. John Washington Butler from Macon County. He was a state rep. He was a farmer, tall guy, had attended a church there, faithful to the church, and he believed what happened in Genesis and the creation story word for word. And he found that people, young men and women, were coming home from college talking about this fellow named Darwin and this concept called evolution, and that it sort of negated the Bible and the Bible story. And he didn't like that, and he set his mind to writing a law that would do two things. One, prohibit the teaching of evolution in any state public school or public university, and two, to prevent any teacher from teaching anything other than the creation of the earth as seen, as portrayed in the Bible.
Boy, Butler doesn't trust what's happening and what's being taught in colleges. That sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it?
Exactly. There are so many parallels between 1925 and 2025, and that's another thing that struck me as I was researching this story. Save for the fact that we have these devices in our pockets that control our lives, these digital devices, many of the same questions that were being asked in 1925 are the same questions that are being pondered today in 2025. They're much more complicated today, to be sure, but it's the same fight that's been going on for a long, long time.
Now, you were able to track down relatives of some of the key players, one of Butler's kin included.
Right.
Had
right.
the apple fallen far from the tree?
Yes. I talked to one of his great-granddaughters who lives, about 30 miles away from Macon County. And she was she admitted that she had not heard about her Butler and the Butler Act until about 3 years earlier, when her father told her, he said, "Did you know that your great granddad had written the monkey law?" And she said, "Well, what is that?" And so then she began to do some investigation and found out very quickly that the evolution law was, the Scopes monkey trial. That was all came about because of what her ancestor had done. She was raised a Baptist, and she believes that the Bible story of creation, and was proud of John Washington Butler for creating the Butler Anti-Evolution Act.
Do we think that this kind of the first ever test case?
Yes, it was. And actually there was sort of a fight. Chattanooga wanted to step in and take it away from Dayton and put it in federal court. Matter of fact, Clarence Darrow even wanted it to go to federal court because he felt he would have a better chance there than he would in Dayton. Other states were also having anti-evolution statutes being written and were on the books, but no test cases had come forward at that time.
Let's talk a little about the teacher, John Scopes. How did he get recruited, and was he ready for what was to come?
So when Rappoye came into the drugstore that day, the Walter White, who was the school director, was in there, and the name of Scopes came up as being perhaps the person who might fit the bill for this.
Was he a full-time teacher, or was he?
He was a full-time
Okay.
teacher, but he did not teach biology. He had taught biology for about 10 days while the other biology teacher was out sick. So Rappoye said Scopes would be the person to do this job. And Walter White, the school superintendent, was there, and he sent a student who was there getting a milkshake or whatever, sent him out and said, go get the teacher Scopes and bring him back. He did, and Scopes walks in and finds all these movers and shakers in the drugstore, and they're talking about evolution. And Rappoye says, "Okay, John, is it possible to teach science without teaching about evolution?" And Scopes says, "No, it's not." And he went and reached, and at that time, students had to buy their textbooks in local stores, and he reached up and got the biology textbook, and he turned it to the evolution chapter. If you're going to teach biology, here's a chapter on evolution, and it's in the state-approved textbook. So John Scopes was then asked, "Will you be our guinea pig? Will you say that you taught evolution?" And he was against it at first. He said, I don't even know if I taught evolution.
Yeah.
His only job during the time that he stood in for the biology teacher was to review for the year-end test. And he said, "I don't know if I taught evolution." And that didn't matter to anybody. He said, "Will you say that you taught evolution?" And then, and he agreed to it. And he had misgivings much later because obviously it in today's parlance went viral very, very quickly, and his name appeared, and he was in the hot seat for the most part for the next 2 months, 3 months.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
When you hear Lululemon, you probably think of Align yoga pants, weightlessly soft, like you're wearing next to nothing. That's why you see them in class, at the grocery store, and in the park. But did you know about skirts with built-in liner shorts so you can still jump for the Frisbee? And tanks, And bodysuits? With Align's iconic stretch, you won't want to take it off. And with endless style options, you don't have to. Shop in-store or online at lululemon.com.
You know, rewatching the original movie Inherit the Wind the other night, I was struck by, all the Andy Griffith cast members that are in the cast, and that Scopes was the first Darren Stevens from Bewitched, Dick
Correct.
York.
Right.
Very many familiar faces. Have you watched the movie recently, and,
Yes,
and what do you make of it?
Yes, I have. And I've always enjoyed the movie, though having talked to many people from Dayton, they
hate it?
They take umbrage at the depiction of people from Dayton as being pious, overly pious, and backward, and oftentimes they wore no shoes, and and hillbillies, And I think the movie took large swaths of H.L. Mencken stories. Mencken was a Baltimore Sun reporter who was at Dayton covering the trial, and his language was acerbic and denigrating. He made fun of the locals all the time, and locals did not like that at all.
Yeah, that character was Gene Kelly, by the way,
Kelly,
in the original black and white version. Right. Then we, of course, are set up for the trial of the century. And they may have used that term for the first time also, but it fits.
It does fit. It does fit in many ways. This was a, we were coming out of the war to end all wars, and modernity was, facing everyone. It's a new world. After World War I, everything seemed to change, and people sense that. And people don't like change. People like to be set in their ways. The world was changing at a fast clip, and certainly we see that in 2025 too. Our world is changing in so many different ways. Even in the past decade, it has changed in so many ways. And people say they like change until they have to face change, and then they don't like changes at all. But we're still, in 2025, we're still looking at trying to answer some of the same questions that they were trying to answer in 1925.
So if the aim was to get more eyes on Dayton and maybe some more opportunity or make it a tourist attraction, did they succeed in 25? Where did people come and where did they stay while they were there to see this spectacle?
Yes. There were thousands that came during the trial, the 2 weeks of the trial. 150 reporters came. There was not enough hotel space. People rented out rooms to reporters. The bulk of them stayed in the upper floors of a furniture store and another store in town. And of course, anytime you draw a crowd, there are going to be opportunists, and so there were people peddling everything from ice cream to monkey souvenirs to hot dogs. They spruced up the courthouse. They put water fountains on all around the courthouse, so everybody could get to water. Nobody wouldn't faint under the heat because it was brutal. It was July. And there had been talk about moving it till the fall, but they wanted to strike while the iron was hot. So fire was hot, whatever the saying is. Anyway.
So it did what Rapelier wanted it to do. I mean, it brought people and eyes to the town.
It did bring people to town, for sure. Once the trial was over, though, it was gone. I should say there was a monkey two monkeys that came to town.
Actual
monkeys.
Chimps, yeah.
Chimps. And they were pictures were taken of them at various establishments all in town. One of them, Mindy, Joe Mindy was a monkey chimp with a war suit, and had been in the movies before. So his owner, caretaker, brought him to town for the trial.
Now, I know there are newsreels, and that this was the first trial ever broadcast on radio, correct?
It was. WGN, they unspooled, thousands of feet of wire so that people could hear it all across the country via WGM as a clear channel station, AM. It was, and it was quite a, they had to, in the courtroom, you had these huge microphones, big round microphones that were set up at 4 different locations around the courtroom. And sometimes they would have to stop the trial so that the technicians could fix some piece of equipment or whatever. It was quite a feat for them to do that back then, because they were basically patching into the phone lines of that of that time.
Now, you showed me the official transcript, which is a bound book, but we really don't have audio recordings because it was too early, right?
Too early, yes. You have some newsreels where you can hear some sound, and you have some sound of Darrow talking about the trial years later, but that's about it that we've got from audio. And of course, William Jennings Bryan died 5 days after the trial.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So Bryan, on the 8th day of the trial, it ended. Basically, the jury found him guilty because Clarence Darrow told the judge, let's just find him guilty. Let's get this on to the appellate side and move on. The judge said, yes, I think so. And so the jury was charged. They deliberated for 11 minutes and came back, 9 minutes, came back and found him guilty. And the judge fined him $100. Now, 5 days later, William Jennings Bryan, he had diabetes, and he stuck around town for a few days he was facing some lectures a lecture tour that he was on, where he was going to move on to after he left Dayton, but he was going to take some time to rest and get up his energy. And unfortunately, he had after preaching or attending church, he came back home, had a very large meal. He was a big eater, and took a nap on the couch and never woke up. So he died in Dayton 5 days later. And of course, there's today in Dayton, his memory is preserved through Bryan College, which was started. Land was given not too long after his death. A man said, "I'm going to give you, all this acreage up on the mountain to start a college in the name of William Jennings Bryan," and that college is still going strong today.
Now, Darrow has been called the greatest lawyer, basically, who ever stepped into a courtroom. You played him.
Probably not as well as others.
Of course, the most the boldest move that he made was to put his opponent on the stand.
Exactly. They wanted, well, first of all, this was sort of a retributive act on the part of Darrow, because the judge had ruled that all of Darrow's scientific experts could not testify. And so he said, well, I'm going to put someone on the witness stand who is called someone who is, say, expert on the Bible. William Jennings Bryan, please come forth. And it was extraordinary. I've been in dozens and dozens of court trials and never have seen where opposing lawyers have called the other to the stand. It just doesn't happen. But it happened in this case. And of course, I'm sure that William Jennings Bryan had in mind, okay, if he calls me to the stand, then I'm going to get to call him to the stand and have my way with him. And of course, that did not happen. Matter of fact, William Jennings Bryan did not even get to give his final summation that he'd worked for days on.
You think Darrow wanted to do that, to deny him that closing argument?
I wouldn't doubt it. I've not read anything that indicates that he did that for that purpose, but I wouldn't doubt it. He was a shrewd man. He knew how to get his point across, and he knew that if he could get Darrow on the stand, that there was a good chance he was going to have his way.
And of course, they get the biggest crowd because by then the proceedings are outside because it's so horribly hot inside.
It's hot inside, but the reason they moved outside was primarily because the plaster on the floor beneath was falling to the ground on the first floor, and it was thought that perhaps because of the number of people, it wasn't just standing room only. Every chair was taken, but there were an estimated 200 people on the stairs and out on the outer rim of the court. And so he said, we're going to go outside because I don't think this building is safe anymore.
Wow.
And so they went outside in the afternoon and had it outside.
Now, I thought it was really interesting that Scopes himself actually comes back to Tennessee, to Vanderbilt.
He does.
To speak.
In April of 1970, he was invited to come back to the Peabody College and to speak to teachers, which said he was happy to do. His autobiography had been published for 3 years, so he told his story from his viewpoint. And he had had a full life as a geologist, working for the oil companies, had traveled the world.
Left the state, though, right?
Left the state. Yeah, he left the state. He went to Chicago to get his master's degree, and then traveled the world working in oil production. Ended up in Louisiana, where he lived for a long part of his life. That was in April. He came to Vanderbilt. That was his last public appearance, and perhaps his last time that he spoke about Scopes publicly, because he went in July of that year. He went into the hospital for gallbladder surgery, and they realized once the surgeons got into him that he had cancer, and he died in October. Following that, just a few months later. So Vanderbilt caught him at the end of his, not only at the end of his career, but at the end of his life. And he was able to, what he had to say to those teachers was inspiring, because he said, the greatest thing that a teacher can do is to let students think. And he received an ovation. And that Tennessean has a fantastic picture of him, of Scopes standing at a lectern. It's sort of from a side view, and his arm is up on the lectern, his other hand is up on his hip, and he just, it's the same man who in 1925 took on the world in favor of evolution. Here we see an older man, a man who's lived a full life. But he's still standing by the principles that he stood for back in 1925.
It's Banner and Company, and my guest is writer and former Banner reporter Leon Alligood. We'll be right back. How does the country feel about evolution and the same issues that were debated 100 years ago? Where do we stand now?
That's a great question. There are studies today that show that many folks do not believe that evolution is true or accurate, and that believing in evolution also negates a belief in God. But there also is are studies that show that people have found a way to reconcile science with the Bible. And I think to do that, you have to ask many of the questions that were being asked in 1925. And if you ask those questions and are willing to have your mind, your thoughts affected by the answers that you get, then reconciliation is not a problem. I think today in America, everyone has to determine if there is a God. And if there is a God, then you've got a lot of questions to deal with. How did he create the world? Did he do it? Is it 7 days of 24-hour periods or 6 days of 24-hour periods, and he rested on the seventh? Or was there something else that's involved? We live in a time where everyone has to find their own answers.
There is a great Darrow quote that you include in the piece about truth.
So Darrow wrote, "The pursuit of truth will set you free, even if you never catch up with it." Brian also had a quote, "Destiny is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of choice. It is not a thing to be waited for. It is a thing to be achieved." Can I read this?
Yeah,
is that
please.
Good?
Yeah.
Implied in both is a call for action. In a democracy, action requires deliberation. To arrive at a consensus requires people of different faiths, partisan beliefs, races, and genders to look each other in the eye, as did Brian and Darrow a century ago, and hear one another. That is why that long ago trial that was about one thing, but really was about so much more, still matters. That's why history refuses to let it be forgotten.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode is produced by Steve Haruch and edited and mixed by me. The original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Our final question is always posed by a previous guest, so I'm going to get you to pick one there out of the fishbowl.
From Paul Collins, what's
like a good surprise site that Nashville should know about?
I would say that a surprising place would be my old stomping grounds, 1100 Broadway, which was since the 1930s, was the home of the Nashville Banner and the Tennessean, which I worked for both papers. All the stories that were told from that place, all the miles, probably millions of miles of newsprint that circulated through the printing presses and then went out to all 39 counties of Middle Tennessee and even beyond. It's just a special, special place. And I will never forget the thrumming of the printing press. You could put your hand on the wall, and when the presses were rolling, it just shook. And I don't know, maybe I'm just weird, but just feeling that little pressure from the printing presses, it just sort of like energized me.